When will people in the West wake up? Well, that was Paris during the Charlie Hebdo attack. That was the Manchester arena bombing, killing 22 people, the youngest, by the way, an 8-year-old little girl. Frankly, that should have been a turning point for Britain. And that shocking footage was the aftermath of a terror attack where a refugee rammed into a crowd of 70 people in Germany at a Christmas market. I could go on, couldn't I? In fact, I might. The 7/7 bombings in London and London Bridge terror attacks. The Bataclan concert terror attack in France, Paris, that killed 130 people. A suicide bomb in Brussels. Madrid train bombings. Hundreds of innocent lives have been lost to Islamist terrorism. And in the aftermath, all that happens are candlelit vigils, politicians offering condolences and vacuous statements of never again. But it always does happen again, doesn't it? But we don't have to live this way. We were warned, not by Westerners, but by Muslims running Arab states.
There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
He's right, isn't he? That was the foreign minister of UAE, by the way, back in 2017. Why didn't any of our leaders actually listen or even bother to pay attention? We all know why, don't we? Because it didn't suit the political narrative that diversity is our strength. What's happened in Australia is yet another example of the stark reality the West collectively now faces. We now have millions of people living in our country, some of whom, frankly, openly hate our way of life, our values, our governments, and our culture. We've handed some of these people citizenships, passports, and welcome them to our societies, only then to find out that they hate us. And then sometimes we're unable to even deport them because of, guess what, their human rights. And yet, another development this evening. The FBI have announced that over the weekend, they disrupted a credible imminent terrorist threat and arrested 4 individuals connected to the Los Angeles area who were plotting New Year's Eve bombings. They say they were pro-Palestine radicals. But listen, I want to end this on a high note, because one man may have saved countless lives. His name was Ahmed al-Ahmed, a father of 2 children who bravely tackled one of those evil terrorists to the ground and as a result suffered 2 gunshot wounds following it. I hope that man gets the highest possible honour in our, well, collective West. I hope he would be. But to talk about that, because there's a gentleman that I think is exceptionally brave and has done and shown an act of courage in a similar breath. I'm very pleased to welcome paramedic and knife attack survivor John Rudat. John, such a pleasure to have you back on the show. Perhaps we could just start very briefly as to what happened to you, and then I'd like to know what it was that compelled you to act.
Of course, Alex. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's an absolute honor. My incident was isolated here in Dresden, Germany, where I intervened where a young woman on the tram was being assaulted while I was with my host brother and a friend of mine. Late night in Germany, the thing progressed. I tried to de-escalate the situation as much as possible, but the attacker had no intention of leaving without harming somebody. And unfortunately, a man came up from the side while I was handling that situation and slashed me in the face.
And as far as we understand it, John, that we believe these men were migrants in Germany. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. They were both Syrian nationals and both illegal immigrants in Germany with prior criminal history.
And John, when you saw this, what was going on the train there, on the public transport, what inspired you to say, I'm going to step in? You were a very young man, and you've got your whole life ahead of you. And these are older men, from what I can understand, and two of them, by the way, and you decided you're going to go and intervene. What compelled you?
The basic justice, the basic human courtesy that all of us deserve. If I'm on a tram, I'm not going to sit by and watch a woman be assaulted and harassed, no matter the country that I'm in, whether I'm a visitor or it's my own country. That is wrong. And I'm going to intervene, and it's wrong.
John, when we see men like Ahmed Al-Ahmed in Australia, who really was incredibly brave in front of a man wielding what looks like a shotgun, and the man took 2 bullets as a result of it. Do you feel some sort of connection to people like that who have done something so incredibly brave that many of us would even be compelled to do? Do you feel some connection to people like that, John?
Deeply. Ahmed is an absolute beacon to how people should approach these situations. Even the intelligence that he demonstrated waiting for the gunman to cock back his shotgun to enter and try to apprehend the gun, disarm him, and neutralize the situation. And he did that perfectly. He deserves, as you said before, the highest honor Western Europe has to offer.
John, and on a final note on that, have you had any recognition by the German state for the work that you did saving that woman?
Very much so. Today, in fact, I'm in Berlin. I referenced you guys were talking about Zelensky's visit earlier. We were visiting here while he was here, and I had some talks with the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, and I truly hope and now believe and feel that there is a future for a strong Germany.
In fact, brilliant stuff, John. You also deserve a medal for what you've done. I hope you get that one day. John Rudat, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it. Let's get the thoughts of my panel here in the studio. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone is with me tonight. I've also got former Tory party chairman and now Reform UK member Sir Jake Berry and Labour councillor Sebastian Salek. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. It's nice to end it on a positive note with someone like John. I think he's obviously experienced it. But Carol, I want to start with you. I strongly believe that these Palestine rallies that have been going on across the West have inspired a new form of radicalisation. I've just repeated at the top of my little speech there that the FBI have apprehended what they think is 4 people that were pro-Palestine radicals that were plotting a bomb attack.
I think there is a direct line between the marches that we're seeing here and what happened in Australia. And the red flags were there in Australia. They'd had the biggest anti-Israel march ever in August this year. It was clear that there was a massive anti-Israel movement, which was not being stopped by Albanese at all. In fact, he was encouraging. And a few years before he became Prime Minister, he actually was part of anti-Israel rallies and shouting through loud hailers. So this is what's happening. And I think what's happened in Australia is the result of years of pussyfooting around and not calling the kind of terrorism we're seeing out for what it is. In this case, we're not calling out the rallies that we see in London every week. For too long, the Liberals and the lefties have portrayed these violent Islamists who stalk our streets and terrorise Jews. They've portrayed them as some kind of heroes who are working in a struggle for the state. It's nonsense. These people want to hurt Jews. I heard someone say today, and it's quite right, this wasn't an attack on Israel. This was a racist massacre of Jewish people, and it's got to be called out as exactly that. And I just think, who was it said? It was Albanese said, this is an attack on all Australians. No, it wasn't. This was Jew haters. This was an attack on Jews, and he has encouraged it. And this country, we are actively encouraging it by letting these people roam our streets, shouting things like "from the river to the sea," not knowing what it actually means, but shouting stuff like that and getting away with it because they can.
Is it globalise the Intifada? In my opinion, Carol, means globalise action of terrorism. That's how I interpret that language. So Jake, Suella Braverman, she came up with some very strong things when she was Conservative Party a minister, when she was the Home Secretary. She was sacked, essentially, at one point in time. Was she right? Was she right to have said, stop the hate marches?
Absolutely right. And I think we will look back at that period in time where these marches were allowed week in, week out to go on by the Metropolitan Police as a radicalisation point for Islamists in this country. We actually talk about this theory of self-radicalisation, and actually what happens is people put something on the internet or they go to a march and everyone agrees with them. They think, well, I must be right, and they go a little bit further. Having these marches every single week enabled the self-radicalisation of these sorts of people. And the other thing which I think is so important in this case it is not unconnected with the fact that Australia recognised the state of Palestine, that this attack happened. Benjamin Netanyahu, leader of Israel, wrote to the Australian Prime Minister and said, "You are pouring petrol on the bonfire of anti-Semitism in Australia." It's the same thing our government did. I personally think it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. We've seen an appalling murder of Jews in Manchester. There's now been an appalling murder of Jews in Australia. We have to stop this. Israel is our ally. It is a democratic state surrounded by dictatorships. When people say from the river to the sea, there's something in the way of that. It's called the State of Israel. What they're really calling for is the eradication of the State of Israel and the murder of all Jews. And we have a government that, through its actions, has rewarded Hamas for the October the 7th attacks. They attacked because they wanted recognition of Palestine. Guess what? This government gave it to them. It is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I think we should look back now and say, it's time that we support our allies like Israel in the region.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that was a massive jump at the time, and I think even Hamas actually applauded the recognition of Palestinian state. But Sebastian, just moving back onto these protests, Suella Braverman took a very hard line. She was sacked for that. You can argue whether she was right or wrong if you like. But we're at a stage now where I was playing footage last night of people outside Sydney Opera House that looked like they were saying gas the Jews, gas the Jews. It's gone quite viral online, that footage. We've seen it here in London. We've seen footage of people saying they want to slit the Jews' throats. There's calls for jihad on the streets. There's globalise the intifada. It's very inflammatory language. And can you imagine if this was a right-wing rally that the Home Secretary has called lesser things, by the way, far-right thuggery? Why do we not get the same condemnation? Why are we not stopping these rallies?
Yeah, I think we have to be really careful not to conflate everybody who goes on that rally.
Of course, I'm not blaming all of them, by
No, but this is important. There are many people who are appalled by what's going on in Gaza and they want to go and exercise their right to free speech, and that is completely fine. There will be people on the other side who are deeply anti-Semitic and want to use it as a vehicle for their hatred. And there are people in the middle who use phrases like globalise the intifada without really understanding what it means. And what I would say to those people, no, it's absolutely not. I would say educate yourself. If you're going to use language like that, know what it means, and ideally don't use language like that. Which is all to say that there are people who are using these kinds of protests to further their evil aims, but there are many people who are just using it to register their deep dissatisfaction with what's happening in Gaza.
You can't deny, can you, that there are people who are... a lot of what I would call the lovies and the rock stars and everything who join with Palestine and think they're doing the right thing. I wonder what they feel today. I wonder what they think their support has done today when they look at what's happened on Bondi Beach. Because a lot of people join those marches simply because they are anti-Semitic. I know it's not all, but it's too many of them. And they're the ones on the streets who are terrorising Jews. We've had an Orthodox Jewish gentleman on GBNews today who talks about what his life. He can't walk the streets at weekend. Neither can his family because they're terrified. And this is supposed to be a civilised country.
We have to be really careful here. Sorry to cut you off.
Right, not to both of you. Go on.
Not to conflate Jews with Israel. We don't know what the people at the Hanukkah party thought about Israel. There are many Jewish people who are also appalled by what's going on in Gaza. This was an attack on Jews.
Yeah, but it won't wash to say that, these innocent people going on these marches, they're not really anti-Semitic. They are driving anti-Semitism. They need to realise that. My advice to them would be, do not go. You are driving the scourge of anti-Semitism in Britain. If you go, it doesn't mean you're an anti-Semite, but you're supporting an anti-Semitic march. The best thing is, don't go. If you feel really passionate about it, write to your MP, write to your local paper. Do not go to these Jew-hating marches in London.
There's a really interesting line from a group called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and it says, and it's worth thinking about, the guns that today slaughter Jews will turn on others tomorrow, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And it'll probably happen here.
No, I totally agree. I think if you don't stop it with... Jews are always the first line,
yes.
and then it goes on to everyone else.
Yes.
But there we go. Listen, thank you very much, panel. Appreciate it.